Welcome to Story Time with the Dangerous Gentleman. Yes, I am the Dangerous Gentleman. No, I did not give myself that nickname, but I certainly did earn it. Today we're going to go back 30 plus years to a time before I was the Dangerous Gentleman, when I was really just a city boy who was learning how to be a country boy. So I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona from the age of 2 until 15. Okay, now the Phoenix metro area is about 3.5 million people, with summertime temperatures well into the triple digits. Yeah, triple digits. So regularly saw 115 to 120 degrees. When I was 15, my parents, we moved up to Northeast Washington, rural Northeast Washington, from a metro area of 3.5 million in Phoenix to the little town with a metro area of about 3,500 people, with temperatures in the wintertime often dipping down well below zero. Okay, talk about culture shock. We didn't know anybody. We grew up in the city, and here we were now in the country. And we had to learn a lot of things. Like, we moved into a house, and we learned that you had to do this thing called cutting firewood and then heating with wood heat, which the only time we had ever had a fire is we had like one of those little like hobby fireplaces in our house that every once in a while we'd throw some sticks in there and in the house and just light this fire. And I think we did it probably a couple times a year, because who wants to light a fire in Phoenix, Arizona? But here we were. It was going to be our primary source of heat. And my dad decided that it would be a really good idea for us to go learn how to work hard and by cutting firewood. So we found out that one of our neighbors up there had some standing trees that he wanted to cut down, that he was willing to give us for firewood. Now, if you know anything about firewood, green wood, like freshly standing live trees, when you cut them down, that is not the best source for firewood. But since we didn't know any better, and hey, this is free wood and an opportunity to teach us how to work, my dad thought it was a good idea. So we went over and he pulled out his little chainsaw, and I mean little city chainsaw. And he starts cutting down these trees, these big, tall, what they're called, they're pine trees. And so they're full of pitch, just sap oozing out of them everywhere. And since we wanted to try to get it done quickly, my dad had this idea. Hey, we're just going to cut them into 8-foot lengths, and then we'll drive them back to the house and we'll cut them up smaller there. We just got to get the wood. We got to get it back to the house. So he starts cutting down these trees and cutting them into like 8 and 10 foot long pieces. And remember, we're city boys. And these logs felt like they weighed about 1,000 pounds. I'm sure they didn't. And it felt like that because of my personal experience with it. Like, it just felt like they weighed a ton. And so we're falling further and further behind, because remember, my dad is just cutting these into 10-foot lengths as fast as he can go. And we're trying to pick these things up and throw them in the back of a pickup truck. And he keeps getting frustrated with us. Why can't you guys keep up? You got to keep up. You got to keep up. Come on. And I'm like, Dad, they're heavy. Dad, you got to come on, cut them up smaller. He's like, no, you just got to, guys got to keep up. You just got to get tough. Let's go. And eventually he got frustrated enough that he actually came back there to where we were working. And he's like, all right, fine, I'll show you guys how to do this. And he goes and picks up the log. And I kid you not, if I'm lying, I'm dying. He said something to the effect of, why didn't you tell me that these things were so heavy? Again, my brothers can confirm that is pretty much exactly what he said. So he decided now that he was going to start cutting them up smaller. And so he's cutting them into like 18 to 24 inch pieces. And they're still heavy, but we're getting the work done now. And so we spent several days cutting that firewood, taking it back to the house, splitting it up with a splitting maul. Again, this stuff is just covered with pitch. And every day by the end of the day, whatever clothes I was wearing, they were literally sticking to me. There was so much sap. And I would take my shirt off, and it would just be like stuck. And thankfully, I was 15, so I didn't have a whole lot of chest hair yet. or else it would have pulled all of that out. But like, oh, the pitch was just everywhere. There was no way I could get it out. And so it was just, and it was Northeast Washington. So it was warm. It wasn't horribly hot, but it was warm. And so we spent a good couple of weeks cutting it there. And then every single time my dad found out that someone had firewood that they were willing to let us cut, he volunteered us because he wanted to teach us how to work. So here we're running here and there, everywhere, every day, cutting firewood, either for ourselves or for other people. And yeah, a bunch of city kids trying to become country boys in a matter of a couple of months. And so we heated with wood all that winter, and it was yeah, we would throw these logs in there, and they were so wet and sappy they would barely burn. But we had some good times up there in that winter weather. Growing up in Phoenix, hot. We didn't like to go outside in the summer. Well, we did. We went outside in summer because we had a swimming pool. But like the only experience we had with snow was when we would drive somewhere to visit the snow and be like, "Hey, we're gonna," and maybe once every couple of years we would go someplace to visit and play in the snow. Well, now we lived in the snow, and there was snow everywhere. And now it wasn't just fun to go play in the snow. Now it was work to go. We had to shovel snow. We had to walk through snow. We had to get our driveway plowed. So now snow was just an everyday part of life. But dang, if we didn't learn how to have some good times in that snow. We learned the concept of sledding. We learned that was a good time. And so my neighbor, different neighbor, just down the road, his family lived on this big piece of property, and they had this logging road that went way up in the hill. And one of the things we used to do as teenagers was have these sledding parties. And we would have plastic toboggans, and we'd have inner tubes, and we would spend all day walking up and down this hill, sledding, and we would have some crazy times. Oh my gosh, like stuff that you couldn't even imagine, like trying to do the craziest tricks, trying to go as fast as we could. We would have people sitting in inner tubes, and then we would lock our feet to an inner tube in front of us, and then that person would lock their feet into inner tube in front of them. And so we would have a train of about 6 tubes, and then we'd just start piling people on there. And we would get a dozen people on a half a dozen inner tubes, and we would just go shooting down these hills. I don't know how fast we would get, but it was insane. At one point in the sledding hill, there was this big steep curve that we had to try to navigate. So we would start at the beginning of the day, and people would be sledding down, and one person would kind of be in charge, and they would create this berm that would it was the idea was that you would hike up the hill, and you would come down, and you would hit this berm, and it would gently ease you around the corner to go shooting down the rest of the hill. And that was a really good idea to start with. Well, one particular day, we had been working on that berm all day long, sledding down the hill and coming down, and it was working really good. It got started to get dark, and we pulled out some floodlights, and so that was fun. But then my friend's mom called us in, and she said, "Hey, I got some hot chocolate." And so we went inside to get some hot chocolate. And my friend had a video camera, so we would shoot videos all day. And so we went into his house, and we started drinking hot chocolate, eating popcorn, and watching the videos that we had taken all day. And it's getting dark, and it's getting real cold outside. And so we decided we would go outside for a few more runs after we got done with the daily footage, the dailies as they call them in the business. And so we went back out, started hiking back up this hill. And the first person comes down, and now this berm, this nice gentle berm that we had spent all day cultivating, it was now a solid sheet of ice. So now this gentle, nice, it was about a 6 foot tall berm that we had kind of nicely shaped all day. And people started coming down it. And each time they came down, they started getting a little bit closer to the top of this berm. Because now it's frozen solid, like a sheet of ice. And each time, it's getting more and more frozen. So after a while, this berm was no longer a berm. Now, this berm was a ramp. Yes, a ramp. I don't know if you've ever been on an inner tube coming down a snowy, icy, nicely cultivated sledding run, but you can hit speeds of 25 to 30 miles an hour. Easy. So now we were coming down this hill 25, 30 miles an hour and hitting this nice ramp. And instead of shooting us down the hill around the corner, we were now launching over the top of the road. And on the other side of the road was a forest. And on the other side of the forest, there was a creek. And each time, like we're getting now we're getting further. Now we're catching major air over this road. And each time, like I said, we're getting a little higher. And now people are really starting, the higher you hiked up into the woods, the more of a run that you would get, the more speed you could get at the bottom. And so now each person is going up a little bit higher and a little bit higher and a little bit higher. You're getting a little bit more speed and a little bit more speed and a little bit more speed. And so now we're hitting this ramp at this jump at 30 miles an hour on an inner tube and launching over the top of the driveway that's probably 12 feet wide and then into the trees on the other side. And we would, there were several times where we would launch across the road and trying to hang on to an inner tube. But you just, after what you just like, you let go of the inner tube and then you reached out for a tree. Literally, you're flying through the air about 8 feet up in the air. You've already gotten about 30 feet of horizontal and you're about 8 to 12 feet of vertical. And you're flying through the air and you drop your inner tube and you just grab onto a tree and then climb down. And then you go do it again and again and again. So after a while, we're getting so much air that one of us, one time, one person launched all the way through and they hit the space between the trees and they eventually went and landed in the creek. So over the road, through the trees and into the creek. That one we don't have on video. I wish we did because we would win. It would be all the rage. It would go viral on the internet. I don't know how we all survived that, but oh man, it brings back so many memories. So many memories, so many Saturdays where we would spend all day. Usually what would happen is me and my brother and my other brother would go spend the night at my friend's house the night before, and we would start to cultivate the run. But then everyone else would show up the next day, and we would sled all day long. Growing up in the snow, well, not growing up, but living in the snow is kind of a magical thing because besides those crazy sledding parties, we had some really good times in the snow. We used to build igloos where we would pile up big piles of snow and then we would dig a doorway in there. One time we got the brilliant idea that we would build these igloos and that we would sleep in them. Well, that didn't last very, very long because it turns out a bunch of city boys from growing up in the desert, they're not real tolerant to the cold. So we lasted a few minutes and then we're like, it's too cold. And we went running back in. There were multiple times where there was a full moon, okay, in the snow at night. And like we lived in the middle of nowhere. So someone would be like, hey, we should go for a walk. So we would pack everybody up and we'd drive to some remote location, and we would put on our snow boots, and we would take a walk at like midnight. And because of the full moon, and because of the snow, and because of the clear skies, it was literally like walking in daylight at midnight. And it was kind of magical. It was just, you can tell that like this is something that I really enjoyed. We had a lot of fun. We would sometimes the roads on the actual community that we were a part of, they weren't like plowed down to the dirt, so there was often a layer of snow on them. And on particular nights, again, moonlight, things like that, one of us would get a wild idea and be like, "Hey, I've got my pickup, and I've got a rope, and actually a couple of ropes and some toboggans, and let's go towing." We called it towing. And so what happened is we'd tie a bunch of ropes and chains and whatever we could get our hands on behind a pickup truck. We'd tie these ropes to the hitch, and we would drive all over the countryside, all over those roads in the middle of the night, getting pulled behind a pickup truck. Had some really good times. I could tell a bunch more stories. The one time that my friend was sliding down this, and so we live right next to the river too. And so he was like, "Hey, I'm gonna sled down this hill and stop before I get to the water." Famous last words. Not quite last words, but like this guy goes shooting down this hill, and we can tell pretty quickly this guy's not going to be able to stop before he gets in the water. But he's on this plastic toboggan, and he hits the water, and like a rock skipping across the water, he hits it fast enough at just the right angle that he skips 2 or 3 times across the top of the water and then crashes. And remember, water, it's cold, there's snow. This guy then had to swim back, and he's in full snow gear. So now he is soaking wet, and I'm glad I wasn't the one that had to try to swim in soaking wet snow gear. Good times though. Good times. We used to go, and we had snowboards and toboggans and inner tubes. And then there was the time, hopefully I'll be able to describe it well. If you grew up in our family, we used to do pretty wild and creative things. We were all pretty smart. We used to come up with these interesting ideas. We decided we would build our own sled out of old skis and plywood. And we called it the Sklooge because it was made out of skis and it was kind of shaped like a luge. This thing was a death trap. It took so much skill to try to get this thing to go straight. We had all these grand ideas of how you were going to steer it, none of which ever worked. But if you could somehow manage to get going on this thing, it was unbelievably fast and just fun. My older brother, he's the one that kind of had this. He's this because this is his nature. He had like this whole thing set up with like ropes and like foot pedals, and like he was the one that only one that ever kind of got this thing under control. And he would this thing was dangerous, but it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. So growing up in the snow was quite the deal. We had some really good times. So there's no real point to this story. Like there's not a major lesson to learn other than it's really fun to have some cool people that like to do cool stuff and to play in the snow and who are willing to just go on adventures in the middle of the night and just be willing to be dangerous. And you got to do that when you're a kid. You got to do that especially when you're a teenage boy. The girls went along too, but the guys were the ones that we could really get after it. And the girls had to try to keep up, and honestly, most of them couldn't. But we had some really good times. Really good times. I'm sure I'll tell some more stories about sledding and the snow and growing up in the crazy Northeast Washington. But for now, I hope you listened to this, and I hope you enjoyed it, because I hope you enjoyed listening to it, because I certainly enjoyed telling it. And while we're at it, go ahead and swing on over to my website at thedangerousgentleman.org. And if you want some more information about who I am and what I'm up to, I'd appreciate it. Also, share this podcast with people. Leave a review. Let people know if you liked it. Appreciate it. I'll talk to you all later.